You all look so beautiful. Good afternoon. And happy CBCF ALC week. I am so proud to be a member of the Congressional Black Caucus, the conscience of the Congress, and to be the first Black woman to represent the Commonwealth of Massachusetts in the U.S. House of Representatives. Thank you all for joining today's session titled Books Save Lives, the Power of Black Storytellers. It is deeply moving to be hosting this policy session during the 53rd convening of ALC, when we have the largest Congressional Black Caucus in the history of the caucus. Now, although we still don't have parity, that's a different conversation, but this is a historic number of Black members. So it's wonderful to be with you for this 53rd convening with an extraordinary panel of experts representing nearly every aspect of the book ecosystem. Now, I am amongst my CBC family, so I know I can speak plainly and say that the rise in book bans is simply the latest effort in an unrelenting and calculated and deliberate white supremacist attack to silence Black voices, to silence the Black community. And we will not let them stop us. Our ancestors were enslaved and laws were codified to criminalize Black people learning to read, but that did not stop us. And now there are school districts that have banned more than 600 books that talk about racism or prominently feature characters of color from being read by Black students. But that is not going to stop us. Coretta Scott King once said that freedom is never really won. You earn it and win it in every generation. So with extremists coming after books that center our history, our stories, our lived experiences, we have to fight for our freedom to read. Last year, I held a community conversation in my district, the Massachusetts 7th, at a local library where I heard from educators, librarians, and others. During that discussion, it was clear that it's not just Florida, it's not just Texas. Sometimes in our Northeast exceptionalism, we like to think that we are exempt from these coordinated white supremacist attacks, but it's the entire country, including the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Now, according to the American Library Association, Massachusetts libraries face dozens of censorship attempts involving nearly 70 books in 2023. In one Massachusetts town, the police showed up to an 8th grade classroom. Let me say that again. In one Massachusetts town, the police showed up to an 8th grade classroom in search of a banned book. I often think about the effect of that police investigation on the students in that school, teenagers that may be struggling with their identities or going through unspoken hardships at home, but find joy and solace in reading. My heart breaks for them because I was one of them. As a child who was experiencing trauma and sexual abuse, it was only when I read Maya Angelou's I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings that I realized for the first time in my life that I was not alone. So when I say that books save lives, I know it to be true because it saved mine. It's why I introduced the Book Saves Lives Act, which would allow every reader to see themselves reflected in our libraries and our literature. We must honor the brilliance and diversity of Black authors, illustrators, and librarians, Black folks of all walks of life. And yes, I'm talking about intersectionality. Black folks with disabilities, the Black queer community, Black people of all faith traditions, all deserve to be celebrated, and their stories deserve to be told, written, and read in books. When it comes to caring about our babies and investing in nurturing learning environments where they can thrive and grow. We should be banning assault rifles, not books. Book bans have no place in our society and they are hurting our students, but don't just take my word for it. Hear it from them. My office partnered with Ed Trust and Black Lives Matter Grassroots to directly seek input from students on this issue because I believe the people closest to the pain should be the closest to the power, driving and informing the policy making. All right, well, while they're queuing that up, I'll just remind folks that we are live streaming, so if you want to bring other people into the conversation, you can tell them to go.
Are an extremely repressive way of restricting what students are allowed to educate themselves on, whether that's in the classroom, in the library, or in safe educational spaces.
I do not feel really good about book bans because books keep me entertained, they keep me happy, and they spread my imagination.
I oppose book bans because it undermines the autonomy of students and teachers, as well as the integrity of the educational process as a whole.
I learned so much about my Black culture, or history, or celebration from books. They don't want them to learn about Black children. They don't want them to learn about LGBTQ stories, transgender people. They don't want them to learn the real truth.
When I think about book bans, I automatically think about the ill intent that usually goes behind it. Book bans target marginalized voices, so therefore it instills ignorance and prejudice in society, which slows our progress.
I don't support the recent efforts to ban books in educational institutions because they limit access to learning from diverse sets of perspectives, and they sweep records of history under the rug. As a student, access to literature gives me a broader perspective, which allows for more critical thinking.
I think it's not fair to ban Black books because they can contain some really important information that will be hidden from the public.
When it comes to the book bans that I have heard, as a student of color, I feel very unsafe and very unprotected knowing that there are officials with so much power that are using their power to limit the freedom of the young Black community.
I'm against book bans because only my mommy and daddy should be the ones who determine what books I can and can't read. They also want me to learn about my culture and all the other cultures. Book bans don't allow that.
I think that they keep us from learning about our Black history and they support white lives.
My view on book bans is that they're completely unconstitutional. It's a direct violation of our First Amendment right to freedom of speech and freedom of expression. And I just feel that, it's a continuation of the oppressive nature of our imperialistic society in America. They're trying to control information we can receive, and it's disrespectful to everything we fought for.
These books are not just stories. They are essential for understanding our history and shaping a more just future. Banning books from Black authors is not just erasing a story. It's erasing the voices and lived experiences of Black people like me.
I don't think that books should be banned because I want to hear everybody's stories. I want to choose what I want to read, and I make the decision to believe it or to not believe it. Stories bring you into a different world full of fun and new things. So I think that we shouldn't take those opportunities away from some people just because the books are banned.
We are protesting against banning Black books. Unban books! Unban books! Unban books!
Y'all need to come loud in that car, babies. And that's what this is about, y'all. I've long held to believe that Black resilience is overrated. I think we tend to romanticize it. I wish our babies didn't have to develop the muscle memory of this kind of resilience. But that being said, I am in awe of them. I am in awe of their resilience and their resistance, their brilliance and scholarship. Let's clap for our babies one more time. Take a quick moment because certainly I do serve in a legislative body and I can't do anything without my colleagues in government. I'm going to talk about my team later because they deserve their own recognition, but I wanted to acknowledge my sister in service, Representative Ilhan Omar of Minnesota. He won't mind if I call him my baby brother, State Representative Justin Jones of Tennessee. Any other colleagues in the House, either from Congress or state legislatures, City Hall? I did serve on the City Council 8 years, y'all, but I love our municipal leaders. Shout out, okay. Before I introduce our esteemed panelists, I did also just want to encourage you to invite people into the conversation today. You can, this is being streamed live on my YouTube channel, which is Ayanna Pressley. And then, of course, you can tag us at Ayanna Pressley, #Books Save Lives, to bring people into this important conversation. Now that our scholars have set the tone, I will invite the panelists, who are already here, to join me on the stage. But let me read just a brief biography, and I do mean brief because they've accomplished so much. So first is Lenny Egerton, who hails from the Massachusetts 7th. For 15 years, he has been one of the co-owners of the only Black-owned independent bookstore in New England, Frugal Books. Frugal Bookstore's mission statement is changing minds one book at a time. Next, we have George M. Johnson, an award-winning Black non-binary writer, author, and executive producer. They are the New York Times best-selling author of All Boys Are Blue, a memoir discussing their adolescence growing up as a young Black queer boy in New Jersey. As of 2023, it is the second most banned book in the United States. And we have Professor Kimberly Crenshaw, Executive Director of the African American Policy Forum and Faculty Director of the Center for Intersectionality and Social Policy Studies. She's a pioneering scholar and writer on civil rights, critical race theory, Black feminist legal theory, race, racism, and the law. We're going to say it all. No erasure here. We're going to say it all. Last but certainly not least is Devin Morris, the co-founder and executive director of the Teachers Lounge. Based in the Massachusetts 7th Congressional District, the nonprofit organization has a vision of driving unprecedented student outcomes by diversifying the people, thoughts, and actions of the educator workforce. The Teachers Lounge mission is to recruit, revitalize, and retain educators of color throughout the greater Boston area and beyond. All right, let's clap for our panelists. All right, thank you all for joining us today. Mic check, mic check. All right, we'll begin with Mr. Johnson. Write candidly and bravely about your life experiences in your words, including All Boys Are Blue. How do you approach writing stories that deal with topics relating to race and identity, knowing that they might be targeted for censorship?
The way I approach it is like, it's a necessity. Like, my ancestors were already writing these stories, but when my ancestors had to write these stories as slave narratives, they had to use pseudonyms, right? Like, they couldn't use their own names to even write some of the greatest stories that we already have. And so I feel like as time has went on, like, it's pushed us even further in how much of the story we can tell. I feel like we're in a space now where it's like, you know what, like, we have to tell the full story. The full story has to include what's going on now, but it also has to include what happened in the past. And we have to be very transparent about what happened in the past. And so for me, anytime I write any narrative, like literally I have a book coming out in 9 days about the Harlem Renaissance. It's called Flamboyance, but it's like the first sentence that I wrote was, all of my heroes were taken from me. And it's because the 14 people who I talk about in the book on the Harlem Renaissance were all Black and queer. But we all learned about them as being Black. Not queer, but just Black. And so it's important that when we're doing storytelling that we write about the totality of what a person's existence is, because my lens isn't just that I'm Black, it's also that I'm Black and I'm queer. And I'm looked at as male, right? Because I identify as non-binary. But it's like all of these things all have to matter in the way that I view the world. And so, as the storyteller, all of these things make sense in how I view the world. In researching for the book Flamboyance, Zora Neale Hurston is literally somebody that all of us should read about. Her research, her work, her anthropology, everything that she did was about us. It was about our accents, the dialects, how it all came to be. But all of that stuff doesn't exist unless we fight for it. Because what ends up happening is if you have a Southern drawl, people think that you're dumb. And Zora Neale Hurston was one of the first people who literally had to fight some of our own people, I'm not gonna say their names, to...
That's the third book.
W.E.B. Du Bois. But she had to fight... She literally had to fight some of our own people to say, like, it's okay if you have a Southern drawl. It's okay if we have certain words and certain, colloquialisms that we have created in different spaces. We should embrace all of it, not push it away because we're trying to assimilate to a thing that will never accept us. And so that's what I think is the most important thing about, like, my writing and writing for Black people is, like, this ain't about nobody else but us. And when we write for us, not to be on some LL Cool J, FUBU stuff, but like when we write for us, it's because it's about us, and it's because some of us grow up in territories where we don't get to know about us. And so it's important that me as a storyteller make sure that we all know about us, but we all know about the totality of what Black community looks like. It's not just heterosexual, it's not just queer, but Blackness is inherently queer, queerness is inherently Black, and you can't have one without the other. But the biggest and most important thing to remember is that the rest of the world looks at us as an oddity. So the rest of the world, so when, people in our own community are like, I hate queer people, it's like, but you queer too, because the rest of the world is anti-Black. And the rest of the world hates you because you're Black, which means you are a queerness to what the rest of the world even accepts. So you should understand my queerness because you queer too. Your queerness may not be your identity, but your queerness is wrapped up in how this world operates.
That's right. Thank you. That's a word. That is a word. All right. Mr. Crenshaw, how do book bans interact with civil rights law, particularly when it comes to accessing information and protecting Black and brown voices? And since there are a number of elected officials in the room, what role should the state and federal government be playing in this moment?
So thank you. First of all, thank you so much, Congresswoman, for leading on this issue. So many of us have been hoping for legislation to take up this issue. And it's been just surprising how difficult it has been to gain traction. So we always knew it would be you, and we're so happy that it is. So there are many points of inflection in terms of the relationship between book bans and civil rights protections. Number one, the most significant one, is that the effort to suppress knowledge, the effort to erase our story, the effort to erase our history is being driven by the desire to take away our power. A people aren't a people without a story. Our demands for justice can't be activated without the story behind where the injustice came from. That's the entire reason why you have these bans called divisive concept bans. What's a divisive concept ban? First thing to recognize is that 23 states and counting have passed legislation that prohibits teaching that creates discomfort in the classroom, or that tells a story that racism is anything more than prejudice, or suggests that our country is inherently racist, or that suggests that meritocracy is not real. These are substantive ideas that they are trying to erase, because they're trying to erase the power that inheres in the effort to actually show that fundamentally we don't have a meritocracy, that actually racism isn't just about prejudice. It's often about structure. It's often about institutions. And in fact, education is supposed to make people feel uncomfortable. They're supposed to challenge what they've accepted as real. They're supposed to apply critical thinking to the conditions of their lives. Without critical thinking, how does anything change? How do we move from myth? How do we move into fact-based policymaking? So the whole point is to take away the power of the word, the power of our knowledge, the power of our experience. If you look at what book bans have actually done, the fact that 25 million school children now go to school in states where they can't learn the full story. And if you look at what the full story is they don't want you to know, they don't want, for example, the Tulsa race riot to be taught as a race riot. They don't want segregation to be taught as an expression of white supremacy. They don't want the story of Ruby Bridges to be taught to their children. So it's acceptable for Ruby Bridges to experience segregation as a 6-year-old, but it's not acceptable for 6-year-olds to understand what Ruby Bridges went through. So think about the long-term consequences of erasing this history. It is designed to make sure that the inequalities that come from the past, that we have stories about, that we can theorize about, that we can connect to the current moment, is completely and totally erased. So if you're making a claim of racial injustice, if you're making a claim for diversity, equity, and inclusion, if you're making a claim for broadening protections against police violence, and you don't have a history from which to say this is the continuing legacy of our dehumanization, if you don't have a story, you don't have a claim. And this is precisely the reason they're trying to take our voices away.
You can't tell me the words aren't powerful, because every time you speak, I'm ready to run through walls. I don't want to follow you on the mic, but I'll follow you anywhere, if you know what I mean. All right. Mr. Ackerton, what role do independent bookstores such as your own play in promoting diverse narratives, and how can everyday folks in the community work to counteract the harms of book bans? I'd love to know how people can be helpful. But you know what else? I remember at the height of COVID, you had such a growth in people purchasing books online. And I just wonder, can you speak a little bit about, just given the moment that we find ourselves in, do you see that still trending? Is there how has that impacted things now that we see a growing number of book bans? But first and foremost, how can people be most helpful?
People can be most helpful by continuing to purchase from us, continuing to buy the books. I wanted to say that these videos that were shown, that's what we're all about. When you come into our store, and especially children, it's like they're looking at chocolate candy on the walls, because it's all about them. And brother, I want you to know your book is on our shelf. During COVID, especially when George Floyd was murdered, there was a call by some educators to ask, what should we read? This was white people wanting to know, what could they read to understand this racism that was going on? So Dr. Kim Parker told them, well, start reading books written by black people to learn their experiences.
Radical.
Yeah, radical. And she said, don't just read the books, buy them from black bookstores. So we're the only black-owned bookstore in the city of Boston. In one night, we received 22,000 orders. I mean, it was off the hook. People were buying, I mean, every kind of book that was written by blacks, whether it was young people, autobiographies, social science, racism. They just wanted to learn. And we're very appreciative of that because we got a chance to not only help earn our income, but to spread word. Because that's the biggest thing, is being able to help children. First and foremost, learn their history, learn about them. The first thoughts that go into their heads is thinking how they are, not coming from a different perspective. You know, run, spot, run is over with. You know, and it's been gone a long time. You know, to have this bookstore and to be able to cater to children and young adults and even adults who are just learning how to read, it's a special thing. It's really special.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Mr. Morris, what strategies can educators implement to push back against censorship while fostering diversity, equity, and inclusion in their classrooms?
First of all, I want to thank you, my Congresswoman. One thing is for sure, and two things for certain. The church doors are always open when the mic is in your hands, and so I want to thank you. I want to thank you for uplifting our work. I want to thank you for the work that you are doing on this important bill that will literally save lives. I want to thank you for centering our babies, their right to equitable, high-quality education, and centering what I believe to be our most valued essential workers and teachers.
We can clap on them. Clap on what it is to be a nation builder. That's what they do. They build nations.
Some of y'all was in here murmuring like, well, what about doctors? Well, you can't be a doctor without teachers, so.
You've clearly had this debate before. Okay.
Too many times. So I'm going to try to be brief. There's a lot to cover on the topic. So skipping over some important context about how hard it is to be a teacher in the wake of multiple pandemics, but particularly black teachers. Skipping over the fact that we have not innovated in what it means to develop, train, and sustain teachers to meet this moment for all of our babies. I'm skipping over all of that. You want to see me off stage? I'm happy to geek out with you though. I'm going to share a short-term, long-term strategy. I'm going to share a resource, and then I'm going to shut up. Sound good? Okay, great. What's hard for teachers right now is fighting for what's right and in the best interest of our babies. But especially knowing that local government and the governing body of school boards are stripping us of the tools and resources that we need to develop critical thinkers and empathetic future leaders of this nation. And so we're going to talk about short-term strategies, but I'm going to uplift some things that have already been uplifted here that I think are important. Books that are being deemed controversial right now are the ones that contain truths that make white folks uncomfortable. A popular justification for book bans right now are the ones that censor characters that are black, brown, and queer. Books that talk about topics of LGBTQIA+, and race matters. Now here's where it gets tricky for some, maybe even some in this room, but we at CBC, the ALC, so we're gonna have some real conversations. Some of us want to talk about the banning of black books, but not talk about the banning of queer. Incredible Dr. David Johns, the the CEO of the National Black Justice Collective, said just as recently as this week, if you allow an attack on one subgroup, you are inviting the attack on yourself. This is why your work is so essential and timeless to talk about intersectionality. Y'all hear all the time people talk about black is not a monolith, until it's time for us to get free, right? And then what your free looks like can't be what my free looks like if your black don't look like my black. And that's the problem. The power behind this book ban initiative is that it is divisive, insidious. A tale as old as the house slave versus the field slave. The first thing that we gotta do is we have to declare that an attack on one of us is an attack on all of us. I know y'all nodded y'all head. An attack on one of us is an attack on all of us. Amen. I sit on this stage as a cisgendered, extremely, say it one more time, extremely light-skinned black man. I know the privilege that I hold when I walk out into this world. The question is, how am I using it to get us all free, and specifically when we start with our babies? This is the work of our organization and the work that we do with early career educators of color to make sure that they understand the radical profession that they are stepping into as educators, and particularly as educators of color. How they deal with purpose exploration and self-exploration necessary to meet this moment and fully service our babies. Help them understand that it's never too early to teach our babies the truth, to develop critical, curious, and compassionate learners. They know what's happening. We saw from this video, our babies are not stupid. Dr. Asa Hilliard says, I've never met a child that was not a genius. But our babies don't get respect or honor for their genius, recognized. So I encourage teachers to encourage their students, talk about short-term strategy, to do online and outside research. Now here's where it's important. We have to teach digital literacy. How do we interrogate the information that we are consuming on a daily basis? The reality is we all know adults need help with this too. We all got a cousin that want to be first to the group chat with a tweet that they read. They didn't do no fact checking, they didn't search anything. And now your auntie... Nobody in this room.
Nobody here, okay.
Now your auntie is out in Springfield and actually thinks that her dog's gonna get eaten in the front yard. We have to give directions as teachers now in this new world, new age, verbally. Sometimes we don't need to put it in writing. Sometimes we have to encourage students to interview their elders, but also to share their own stories. That means that we have to see our babies and listen to them when they tell you who they are. You don't get to determine that. We have to strategize in communities even beyond our school buildings on how to teach around these unjust policies. But with the lens of your local context, right? But it's really important. The thing we push our teachers all the time is you gotta get outside of your building. Because what's happening in your building may not be what's happening in other places. I promise I'm gonna wrap up. Outside of school buildings, and this is why this is important, and folks like Lenny and the work that he's doing at Frugal, EdLock convening. I just came back from Baltimore. Shout out to Sharonda Bossier and Heather Harding for the incredible work they're doing. EdLock is the Education Leaders of Color. They have a national convening every year. They hosted many ways that they poured into education, into leaders of color in this space, but they hosted a banned book store. And so they showcased some of the most top banned books across the country, right? All Boys Aren't Blue, of course, top 2, soon to be not 2. When Stars Are Scattered, the Black Kids, just to uplift a few. But what was really beautiful about this tactic was, in addition to the books themselves and highlighting the artists, the authors, and the text, they also had these placards that uplifted why these books are under attack. We're creating discourse that I encourage teachers to do with their students and families so that they can do their own research, but but you have to understand why these books are under attack and enlist, but especially the ones that are under attack in your area, right? And so in Massachusetts, we have books that are challenged, not yet banned. Now is the time. We are not safe. Now is the time to uplift those books that are being challenged in ways like this, to partner with local bookstores, to make sure that they're showcasing these books outside of our schools and libraries as well. Okay, last thing, I promise, long-term strategy. Y'all gotta get on school boards. So what's happening right now is that the same damn people who are pushing these book bans are enlisting their supporters to get on your local boards across the country. And what that means is that they have more power to censor what teachers teach and what students learn in our school buildings. If you value an equitable and high quality education for our babies, you need to run. Now, maybe you don't want to run. That wasn't in your bingo card. Here's what you need to do. You can still vote. You can still support the folks who are doing the necessary work at the local level. Who are the influencers? Who do you need to connect with? This is important, and this is where all of the real battles are won. The presidential election is important, but I promise you, those school boards are dictating what your babies and our future leaders, the folks who should be sitting on this stage next year, are learning, what they are critiquing, what they are challenging. And so you have to get involved civically. We cannot cede any more power to the folks who are trying to destroy our public education system. So one resource I'm gonna share, School Board Partners. It's an organization, good brother Ethan Ashley is doing some work down in New Orleans. They are essentially doing work to train sitting board members with trainings and mentoring, but they're also, this is new and really important, they are building pipelines to school boards. So they're starting earlier and training folks to figure out how they can attack from within. School Board Partners, I encourage you to look it up and figure out how you all at your local level can get involved and support your school.
Thank you. The harm is precise, so we have to be just as prescriptive and precise, so we thank you for that precision, both short-term and long-term. We are going to turn it over to audience questions, but before we do that, this should not be a hard question, even though I'm going to ruminate on it. If everyone, and we'll start with you, George, and we'll do a little popcorn, could just tell me, share with the audience, a book that changed or saved your life.
Yes, so a book that changed and saved my life was Catcher in the Rye, because I hated that book. All of my heart and all of my spirit. So literally, the books that changed and saved my life were Catcher in the Rye, The Glass Menagerie, The Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. All of them were terrible books. Little Women, not because it wasn't like a book that could help certain people, but it was like, I have no idea what a prairie is. I live in Plainfield, New Jersey. But I'm just gonna be honest, those books actually changed my life, saved my life, because I was like, damn, this is actually ridiculous that I have to find empathy for people who don't look like me, who don't feel like me, who don't understand my lived experience, and I don't want the next generation of people who come after me to have to only read about these type of characters without reading about characters that look like themselves.
All right.
So, to be honest, people always ask me, like, what made you be this writer, this journalist? And I was like, it wasn't my love of writing, it was my hatred of what I was feeling. It was my hatred of what I had to be fed. Because it was through an assimilation pipeline. And if you think about those stories, and you think about who Holden Caulfield is, Holden Caulfield right now is 78 years old and running for president of the United States of America. So if you go back and read Catcher in the Rye, and then you think about who Holden Caulfield actually is, he's running for president of the United States right now. And so that was the assimilation pipeline. And so when I hear stories about, well, how could, people in, let's say, black community vote for him? Because they were assimilated through Holden Caulfield. And because some of us rejected Holden Caulfield and said, I'm gonna write my own story, and we're gonna tell our own stories, that's how we got out of that. But some people are still trapped in the fact that the book that they read was about this particular person running right now. And so that's why I write what I write, and that's what encouraged me to write what I write, and that's what inspired me to write what I write. And I hate to say it, but it's like, it wasn't my love of certain books, it was my hatred of what we were being fed, and my desire to feed us something different.
We love that righteous indignation led you down this path, to be clear. Professor Crenshaw, a book that changed and saved your life. It could be one you wrote.
or trying to write right now. I got a deadline coming up.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for being here.
And I didn't know it was going to be live streams. I know my publisher is probably not. No, I'm supposed to be home. But I will divide it up between a book that allowed me to see where I was in history and a book that allowed me to see the possibility to change our trajectory. The first would be Roots. It just, it told a narrative that placed our history beyond American borders and stretched far into a future. So that affirmed me. But the book that actually, I think, changed my life, I'm going to get nerd blowback here, but I'm going to tell the truth. It was Derek Bell's Race, Racism, and American Law. And I think it's because of the time in which I discovered it. I was on my way to law school. This is going to be in the memoir. A civil rights leader told me, when I proudly told him that I had majored in African American studies, that I was going to flunk out of law school. I was devastated, but angry. Angry that the thought that literacy about our lives, literacy about our history, was a disqualifier, that you would fail at the study of law if you placed our history at the center of your consciousness. So as I was grappling with that, I wandered into the library and found Derek Bell's Race, Racism, American Law. And just to give you a sense about what's in there, on the very first page, there's a picture of Tommy Smith and John Carlos in the black fisted power salute at the 1968 Olympics. It told you everything you need to know about what was in that book. He was going to run the race. He was going to give you legal analysis. He was going to give you tight legal analysis, but he was not going to erase the position from which he was analyzing. The story that he was foregrounding, the people who were at the center of his consciousness. When I saw that and realized that this was a law professor at Harvard Law School, I didn't think two thoughts about this person who told me that I was ill-equipped. More to the point, everything in that book became the center of everything that I've done since. So if you want to know where critical race theory comes from, it comes from that book. It comes from, I will not unsay and unknow and erase what we know about our history. We're going to look at law from that vantage point. And that is what critical race theory is, and that is why they're trying to take it away.
All right, we need to move to audience questions, but Lenny, you have a book that changed, saved your life?
Two books. The first book that I read that struck me was the autobiography of Malcolm X. And I learned that if he could change the course of his life, I could also. And it encouraged me to read the dictionary from A to Z. The second book was From Superman to Man by J.A. Rogers. It's historical fiction. I just love the way Dixon whooped that man intellectually. And it although it's fiction, it helped me understand politics to a degree. And I've been interested ever since.
All right. Kevin?
I'll be brief. I just want you to know I wasn't prepared for this question, so I sat here and you would have thought I never read a book in my life. I was a career changer, was doing design work and footwear for a number of years before I transitioned into education. And you know, when you reflect back, you realize those like pivotal markers in your sort of journey and transition. And it was A Hope in the Unseen. It was a book that I didn't realize the impact that it had at the time, but I reflect back and thinking about how I was engaging, how I was supporting students inside the building, outside the building, think about the resources that our babies were getting or not getting, and how that changed their trajectories. I think back to how influential that book was.
Thank you. All right. All right, well, let's give it up for our panel. And now we're going to turn it over to audience questions. I have my entire indefatigable, dedicated A-team here, which we're going to acknowledge momentarily, but I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge Dorcas from my DC office. Dorcas has her hand in the air, and she has the microphone. If you have a question, and you know where we're going with this, a question.
I appreciate that.
That means it has a question mark.
My question is, I was elected to our school board and serve as our vice president.
All right.
I'm in the state of Iowa, so I serve in the northwest corner. Yes.
Yes, we're praying for you.
Thank you. Yes.
And some healing. Good.
Currently working on my doctorate and looking at the shortage of teachers in America. What would you recommend, or how would you propose we do internal recruiting and create a synergy to create an interest in education?
We don't have time for the answer to this, okay? I'm gonna check on you after, okay? The short thing is that you cannot, so many schools come to us and ask us to recruit more. They want us to recruit more educators of color and have done no interrogation of why it is important and whether or not they've had the tough but necessary conversation with white educators around why this is important, so that we can create the environment that would be welcoming and sustaining for more educators of color to come. You know how this works. Anyway, I'm gonna stop here.
Well, I will just add as a lawmaker that I'll never believe that we can put kids first by putting teachers last. And so for me, the best way to recruit educators is to center the humanity of aspiring educators, which is why I fought so hard to cancel student debt, which is why we need universal child care, which is why we need paid leave, which is why we have to address the fact that the rent is too damn high. People can't afford to buy a home in the community that they were raised in. So we have to right-size all of those other things as well. Yes, Dorcas. Sorry, I was out of pocket. Okay.
Hello, my name is Amara Keone Abdullah. I was kind of raised in movement by a professor of Pan-African Studies, and so I've kind of been around literature for my whole life. However, I was a really resistant child. I didn't really want to do anything that my mother told me to do. So every time she would tell me to read, I would literally pick out sentences and be like, oh, this is what I know about the book. And I hadn't read almost any of it. But I fell in love with reading through bell hooks. And I received All About Love on my 16th birthday, and it took me a year to finish it, but I finished it. And it was the first book that I ever finished that I wasn't forced to read. And so my question to you all is, even though you already answered the question about like what book changed your life, how as a young person especially were you introduced to reading as not just a thing that you're told to do, and reading as not just like a way to memorize things, but to actually be inspired by things and actually express yourselves creatively?
am I the youngest up here? I felt like everybody looked at me like, well, it's almost like, y'all know, like in black families, it's like, well, who gonna go upstairs and run and get first? Who gonna go?
Or the remote control.
Right, who get the remote? Right, it's like everybody looked at. I felt like everybody looked at the youngest.
You got that.
That's a great question, honestly. The first thing I will say is that, like, I had a mother and a grandmother who were praying people. And because they were praying people, our first text that we read was the Bible. Things that were biblical stories. So, like, they already had ingrained in us, like, this thing to want to know more, to want to learn more, right? They have, like, the Bible, then they have, like, the children's version of the Bible. And so we would go to Sunday school, and we would go to, like, these things that helped us to encourage us to, like, want to read more, learn more. But the dopest thing about my mother was that my mother was very pro-black. My mother is still very pro-black. And she would take me to my public library, and she would allow us to pick out books that, like, interest us, right? Like, and it wasn't just about, I'm gonna age myself, I guess, a little bit, but it was like, Charmed was like a really big show when I was growing up, right? Like, it was like, right, I'm still a baby, but it was like the CW had this show called Charmed. So everybody wanted to know about witches. And like, what do witches mean? And I was enthralled with this show. So much so that, like, I would be like, to my mom, like, I need to go to the library because I want to learn about witches. And my mother would just be like, okay. But she allowed me the space to explore, right? I always say the imagination is where Black liberation and freedom resides. Because once the outside community can take away our imagining of freedom, then that's when they know they got us. So as long as we can imagine something that's different, something that's spectacular, something that's great, they can't take that away from us. And so for me, I got to be a kid that had an imagination. And my mother allowed my imagination. And so when it comes to, like, how do you get kids interested in things? I have a nephew, we call him Baby G. He loves dinosaurs. And, okay, I'll tell the story. And we, as adults, you know, the night before, we're drinking while he was asleep. And the next morning, he decided to get up at 7:30 a.m. and come downstairs and bother his Uncle Matt while I was hungover. And I'm laying on the couch with one eye open, and he's like, "You sleep?" And I'm like, now I'm not. But we're up, and he likes dinosaurs. We cut on the TV, and Jurassic World happens to be on. So the biggest thing that I could do was, even in my most hurt state of intoxication, we're gonna sit here and we're gonna watch Jurassic World, and we're gonna talk about dinosaurs, and we're gonna talk about these things. And so that's where the encouragement comes from. It comes from participating in the interests of the child. And as a queer kid, I think even more so, it's like something I talk about in All Boys Aren't Blue is whether you're a boy or a girl, whether you're this or that, it's about leaning toward the gravitations of the child. If your child gravitates towards this thing, then you should lean towards it too, not shun them from it. And so that's actually how children get to explore their interests, is when we just take a step back and watch what the interests naturally are. And more of us in community would be better if we watched what the child naturally gravitated to and then encouraged it, versus trying to force them down a pipeline that society continues to tell us, well, you're a girl, so you shouldn't read those type of things. You should read this. You're a boy, you shouldn't read those type of things. You should read this. And so I think that's where my thing came from, was because my grandmother, she didn't care what your gender was. Everybody would clean this house on Saturday. She had 5 grandsons. And she probably wished she had granddaughters to clean up, but she was like, well, y'all boys, clean up. You know what I'm saying? But that was supposed to be a girl's job. And so when you grow up in that type of environment where gender norms don't matter, that's how you break those curses.
Hi, I'm Maya Wright. Y'all didn't ask, I told you. I'm so awkward, I'm sorry. I want to know how your relationship with your publishers or your book agents have changed. Okay, answered. Has changed since the resurgence of book banning and the rise in numbers.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is George M. Johnson. I wrote a book called All Boys Are Blue. It's the second most banned book in the United States. How's my relationship changed with my publisher? It hasn't changed realistically any in that sense. My next book that's coming out literally in 9 days is about the Harlem Renaissance. The book band, it's called Flamboyance. It's about the Harlem Renaissance and about the queer people from the Harlem Renaissance. The reason I wrote the book partially was because they were telling me, you can't tell your story. And they were trying to suppress my story. And it was a bunch of people who had never read my story trying to suppress my story. And a bunch of, like I said, organized chaos that was trying to tell us that these books don't matter. And so that's what made me decide to write the story. But what I will say is publishing has not shifted away from the hard. They have not like all of a sudden been like, you know what? All of these bans are not gonna allow us to write these certain books. But it's on us as the writers to say, we're gonna continue to write these books because the threats are imminent. They have not stopped. I almost got into a fight in the airport with someone from Iowa. I talked about it. Like someone from Iowa who literally followed me in a bathroom and sparked up a conversation that was like a weird conversation. But once we got to the bottom of it, I was like, oh, you actually recognize my face because unfortunately Governor Kim Reynolds has blasted my book and my face all over TV in Iowa because that's what the book ban bill in Iowa was based on, was All Boys Aren't Blue. And so for me as an author, it was like, well, if you're gonna ban this one, you're gonna have to ban every single thing that I write because I'm gonna keep writing it. And then as you said, like, what do the publishers feel? The publishers have stepped in, the publishers have helped, but also at the same time, I think it was a lesson in like also challenging them. Because it's like, y'all make textbooks. So, yes, so go ahead, because it's like, y'all make the textbooks. And I had to, like literally, I had a conversation with my publisher. I've seen your name on the bottom of textbooks. So when they doing, well, we're gonna ban these 600 books, say, that's great, and then you won't get math books from us.
If they're willing to do that.
Right, and that's where we're at. Right? So it's like, what is that's the stand that has to happen. Well, that's great. You wanna ban, all 1,200 of these books? Well, we won't send you any educational materials. So let's see who wins in this, And so sometimes it does have to become that type of battle, and sometimes for us as authors, we have to almost push them to get there because business is business. But I will say the industry hasn't shifted too much. And the last thing I'll say is, these people are so unintelligent, right? I feel like I'm fighting a bunch of idiots. And the reason I say that is because they have not said, okay, y'all watch the news, right? They have not said critical race theory in how long? A very long time, right? They stopped saying woke, right? They stopped saying Antifa, right? So these dummies, they ran around running critical race theory, when really some idiot within their group saw CRT, thought it was critical race theory when it really was culturally relevant teaching. Because that's the main thing that actually is the curriculum. It's called culturally relevant teaching. And that's how our books get in school systems, because they look at the makeup of the classrooms and say, oh, this classroom is 30% black, 30% white, 30% Asian. Well, the books need to be 30% black, 30% white, 30% Asian. And so that's actually what ended up happening. But somebody ran with critical race theory, made it a big thing, and now they don't say it anymore because they realized like, we were We were way off.
Oh no, they don't say it anymore because they've moved on to DEI. It's not that they're confused. Let me
they're not confused. They just dumb.
Say this.
Trust me, I know this. The only reason I say this is because they tried to ban my book in a library where my book was not there.
Yeah, that's
I'm telling you,
true.
these people are not that intelligent. And the more we realize it, because I think we take on that they actually have a strategy, and the more we realize that they actually don't have a strategy, is the better approach to us ending what they're doing. Because we actually think that they're targeting things and doing things, and when it was one white woman who made a list of all of our books, sent it out to all 50 states, and then got it banned, which is how we learned that 70% of the books that were banned came from 9 people.
This is true. But George, we'll have a little friendly conversation. I'll start with this. There was a strategy. Just like Project 2025 is a strategy. It's not as though they stumbled on this stuff. Now, they do some testing, they do float some ideas, they try to figure out what's going to stick, they figure it out. We can capture all of this anxiety that's been generated by this growing multicultural, multiracial country. We can capture all the anxiety about the George Floyd uprising. We can capture all these ideas and package it in an idea called critical race theory. And we can go after anything about race that makes us uncomfortable. So they figured it out, they were able to be successful in it, and now they moved on. They moved on to DEI. That's why the main thing that's going to be said against Kamala Harris is she's a DEI president. So we've got to be able to get inside of that argument and push back, and we've got to push our allies. These publishers are some of the ones that are causing others to edit their books to take race stuff out. Right? I'll give you one story and I'll turn it back over to the Congresswoman. There was a woman who wrote a book about her grandparents meeting in the library in an internment camp. She wrote about the internment of Japanese Americans as racism. Scholastic, the biggest school publisher of books, edited it out and said that she would lose her contract if she didn't agree to take it out. She disagreed. She said, I'll be willing to lose the contract. I'm not going to distort the truth about my people. That's the kind of pushback that we're going to have in order to fight back against this effort to censor our history.
Before we conclude, I want to recognize the efforts of so many of you here today in the fight to ban books, and I'm going to videotape this actually for posterity. But if you are an author or illustrator, can you please stand? Educator, whether kindergarten teacher or college professor, please stand and stay standing. First teacher, please stand. And if you believe that books save lives, please stand. Now look around and know that the power in this room, the power of all of you is stronger and mightier than the forces of hate that seek to divide and silence us. Your stories matter and deserve to be told, and your story can save lives. One more bit of housekeeping, the most important, because I believe in ensuring that there is no erasure, especially when it comes to Black intelligentsia. I want to acknowledge the dedicated efforts of my entire A team. I wish they would all come up here, but they're humble. And I thank my A team. And as he tries to leave the room, the author of the Book Saves Lives Act, the one who made today possible, leading my team, DeMarco Johnson, my legislative director. That's right, I got a Black man, an HBCU, and Ivy League alum setting this agenda. Leading our legislative team. Thank you to every member of my A team. I love you all. I appreciate you. Thank you for listening. late bringing love every day on behalf of the MA7. All right, love y'all. Books save lives.